I'm here with Dr. Jenny Chesters, Research Fellow and Lecturer here at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. Thank you very much, Jenny, for giving me the time for this interview. My first question is, what makes socioeconomic status an important topic in relation to research and policy?
Well, I think it's important because for quite a long time Australians believed that we're in an egalitarian society and that it didn't really matter who your parents were or where you lived. If you did well at school or you worked hard, you could get to the top of the social hierarchy. And actually that's not so much the case these days. Policies have changed, and I think it's actually harder for young people from poorer families to do well at school. To be supported at school and to get through the system and then get into a good job. This is really important because good jobs today, that is jobs that are secure, that pay a living wage so people can get on with their lives independently, those jobs typically need a university degree. And without a university degree, you're pretty much relegated to a lot of precarious work, unless you're lucky enough to get an apprenticeship, and then you can develop a trade, which is another good avenue for jobs. But unfortunately, the apprenticeship system is pretty much in collapse. We haven't been investing enough in the vet system. For young people who aren't doing particularly well at school, there's really no option. If you don't go to university, pretty much you're going to have precarious work. So I think that it's important because we have to look at Australia as a society that is actually not allowing young people to improve on the position that they were born into.
And what are some of the insights from your own research work in relation to socioeconomic status on the one hand, and education, work, or life outcomes for young people on the other hand?
I've done a lot of number crunching. I've looked at data that comes from the longitudinal surveys of Australian Youth Project and the Housing, Income and Labour Dynamics in Australia project, and many other data sets. I just want to focus on the longitudinal survey of Australian youth because that project actually captures the students who do the PISA assessment at age 15, and then it follows them for the next 10 years. So we have data on those young people from when they were 15 at school all the way through until they're 25, and we can actually see what was their score of their academic potential as measured by the PISA score at age 15. And did that have an effect on whether or not they went to university? I then looked at, did family background have an effect on, first of all, their PISA score, but second of all, on whether they went to university. So I looked at young people at age 15 who were in the highest group of the PISA scores. So these were the highest achieving students in the top 25% of the scores. And you would expect that students that are doing that well at age 15 would all go to university. That was my expectation, that it wouldn't matter what your family was like, you would go to university. But what I found was that children who had came from low SES families were less likely to go to university than children from high SES families. And that doesn't make sense because at age 15 they're achieving at the same level. So why would that make a difference? And so then I also looked at maybe the school they're going to makes a difference, and actually it did. So children who went to school with other children who were high SES, they were more likely to go to university than if they were high SES children who went to a school that was predominantly populated by lower SES children. So that doesn't make sense either. Why is there an effect for your family SES and your school SES? And that's something that I'm really interested in, and that's a field that I'm pursuing now. I've also looked at some administrative data for Naplan test scores for the government schools in the ACT. I have Naplan scores for the children, their Year 3, Year 5, Year 7 and Year 9 Naplan scores. And I found that even if I controlled for their score in Year 3, so the high performers in Year 3, and track them over time, the middle performers, the low performers, the children who had low SES families might have been doing well in Year 3, but they don't do quite as well through the other years as the high SES children. So SES has a cumulative effect over the schooling career. I also found that high SES kids in low SES schools didn't do as well as high SES kids in high SES schools. And the opposite was also true. If you were a low SES kid and you went to a high SES school, you did much better than if you're a low SES kid going to a low SES school. So again, reinforcing what I found from the LSA data, I also found that with the Naplan data in the ACT, that it's the family's socioeconomic status and the school's socioeconomic status that's making a difference on children's Naplan scores and PISA scores.
And what are some of the emerging areas of research and policy in education in relation to socioeconomic status?
So building on what I just said, if you think what are the policy implications of putting so much weight on Naplan scores? So it's a huge investment every year. Governments, schools, parents, everyone is investing heavily into this Naplan testing regime. But if it's so highly correlated with SES, what is the point? It doesn't make any sense, and this is becoming a big issue. You would have seen that some of the state governments are now calling for the abandonment of the whole Naplan scheme. Other states are saying we should be modifying it. There's a big debate about should we be spending that money on testing children, or should we redirect that money on teaching children? So that's becoming quite a big debate. Another thing that people are concerned about is why would we be using Naplan scores to allocate funding to schools or to assess teacher quality? It doesn't make any sense if Naplan scores are so highly correlated with a student's SES. So how do you improve your Naplan score at your school? Get rid of all the poor kids, bring in a bunch of rich kids, immediately your Naplan score will go up. Well, that doesn't make sense, does it? So why are we putting so much emphasis on Naplan scores? So I think, for example, the My School website is causing some issues there. And the reason why I bring the My School website up is this was a policy that the federal government decided would be a good idea so that parents could choose their school. So you could go onto the Naplan site and say, well, my kid's school isn't that great. Maybe I'll look for another school. I'll pick a school with a higher Naplan scores. And the problem then is that children with high SES parents leave low-performing schools. That means that the performance of that school goes even lower because there's this correlation between Naplan and SES. So you have this marketisation of schooling, you have children who leave low-performing schools based on the fact that, well, if I go to this high-performing school, I'll get a higher Naplan score. At the end of the day, nobody that employs you is ever going to ask you what your Naplan score was. It's not that useful outside of the school context. So I think that they're being misused, and it's developing into a debate now of why are we marketising the school system? Who benefits? Do the children benefit? Do the teachers benefit? Do the schools benefit? This is what is another emerging area of research. And now that we can have some data to capture those issues of what is happening, because Naplan's been around for over 10 years now, we can actually see trends over time. We can look at our PISA scores, which are another standardised test. There's a big debate about, we're falling behind on that, but we're falling behind at the same time that we're polarising our schools into poor schools and wealthy schools.
How do you think teachers can be supported to tackle some of these inequities in their classrooms?
Well, this is important because there's an assumption out there in some parts of the non-academic field that if we just got better teachers, that all of our problems would be solved. That just shows a very naive understanding of what happens in schools. And teachers have to deal with a lot of issues. There's the public perception of what happens in schools. There's curriculum that they have to deal with. There's parents' expectations. There's a principal's expectations. And then they have the children in the classroom. And some of those kids might not have had breakfast. So now we have some schools that have a breakfast club. Some kids turn up without lunch. So now we have some schools that have to have a lunch club. How can we support teachers is what we should be saying, not what do we expect of teachers. We should be asking, how can we support teachers to engage children who may not be eating properly, may not be having regular sleep, can't afford the resources that are needed. We have children in Victoria who in secondary school can't choose the subjects that they really want to study because their parents can't afford the resource fee. I mean, this is outrageous. How does a teacher feel when they say, this child is really talented in this field, but their parents can't afford that $300 at the beginning of the year, so that child misses out? That doesn't make any sense to me. And I think that the question should be, how can we, as a society, as governments, how can we support our teachers to do the job that they actually want to do?
And what's your advice for an early career teacher who might have students from low socioeconomic status backgrounds?
So when you get allocated to a school, the first thing that you should do is go onto My School, even though I don't really agree with it, but you should go onto My School and you should check out some things. Look over time at, is there been any change in their Naplan scores? Are they always around the same? Are they going up and down? Are they on the downward slide or an upward slide? You need to know that. You also need to go to the finance page and have a look at how much money the school's getting in. Is the money coming from the federal government, the state government? Are they good at fundraising? i.e. in a high SES area, you're more likely to do well at fundraising than if you're going to school in a low SES area. You need to acquaint yourself with the school. This is before you get there. This is just, okay, this is the school I'm going to. Get to know a bit about the background so that you have an understanding of what the population of the school is likely to be. The other thing that you need to do, particularly if you're in a low SES area or you have maybe half the kids are low SES or maybe it's just a few kids who are low SES, you need to understand something about them that you can connect with. So children tell you things all the time. Doesn't matter if you're in primary school, they're always talkative. High school, even when there's a crisis, students need to reach out to someone and they're likely to reach out to someone at school. So you need to listen to them and try and get a sense of what they're doing. I'm not saying you have to take on their role and advocate for them, but you need to understand what's going on, because unless they trust you, they won't learn from you. If you don't give them confidence and inspire them to learn, that they won't. They can't engage. If you think about children in primary school, it's no point talking to them about things they've never experienced. So you can't talk to them about museums and art galleries or even, if they live out in remote areas, you can't talk to them even about escalators because they might never have experienced it. Okay, so you have to get a sense of what have these children had, what have they experienced, so that you can anchor your teaching to what they've experienced. Because in many cases, low SES children don't have the abstract thinking levels that you're expecting them to have. And it needs to be more concrete. So the way you're teaching has to take into consideration, what can I anchor this subject to that they already may have experience of? I give you an example. When I had a young girl from a remote Aboriginal community staying with me for a couple of weeks, I took her to the museum here in Melbourne and she was blown away by spiders. It was amazing. I couldn't get her away from the spiders. She wanted to know everything about every single spider because she knew what spiders were. So she had something to anchor her learning to, and that's what's important. What can you do in the classroom that reflects what they know about at home already?
Thank you very much, Jenny. It has been a great pleasure talking to you.